Well, thank you very much, Jonathan. Thank you, Boaz, who I don't think is here right now, for having me. This is going to be slightly anticlimactic. I will not be able to deliver a rousing speech, nor will I be able to thrill you with fascinating historical and biographical detail. What I would like to do with my 10 or 15 minutes is to share a few comments and observations about homegrown jihadists in the West, in Europe and North America, and where I think we're likely to go. To you, if you're from Israel, this may seem like 1,000 miles away, and it literally is, but it's especially remote considering the drama that is currently playing out in the region. So I'll ask you to bear with me. It won't take that long. The debate about homegrown radicalization in the West has often been fraught and overly simplistic. 90% of the time, the question in America and the question in Europe is it going up or is it going down? Do we have more homegrown radicalization? Do we have less? Will we have more terrorism? Will we have less? I don't think that question can easily be answered, and I don't think it is necessarily the most important question. What I'm interested in and what I'm talking about today is not so much quantity, but quality. For me, jihadist radicalization in Europe and America is a given. It will continue almost regardless of what happens. What I want to know is not just how much there will be, but also what it will look like, its shape and form, its nature and expression. And that's what my 3 observations are about. If you could put on my, or should I put it on? Yes, I can do it myself. There you go. And that's what my 3 observations, oh, by the way, these are my Twitter handles, so please feel free to add me. Before I go into detail, one more word about quantity. One more word about quantity and about the question of trends. There have, of course, and you will be aware of this, 2 events earlier this year that have shocked people on both sides of the Atlantic. The Boston bombing in April, the beheading of a British soldier on the streets of London in May. What do they signify? Newspapers, journalists were very quick to conclude that they represented a new surge in homegrown radicalization, a dramatic increase. One event and a trend was born. That's always been the trouble with terrorism and the trouble with trends in terrorism, because thankfully, in most Western countries, terrorism is a rare event. It doesn't happen that often, and that makes it very difficult to determine trends. If you're a journalist, 2 events, in some cases even 1 event, will be enough for you to talk about a dramatic increase. But for an academic who cares about rigor, it is impossible to say there's a trend or even a pattern. So I don't think that because of the events in Boston and Woolwich, the situation in America or Britain has fundamentally changed per se. They were shocking events, both of them, but they shouldn't necessarily fundamentally alter our assessment of the situation. If anything, the numbers in terms of plots and arrests, and maybe our colleague here can correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I know, the numbers in terms of plots and arrests on both sides of the Atlantic are slightly down. It continues to be a threat. The threat is serious. It's always been serious, but it is not inherently more, nor is it inherently less serious than it was before those 2 events occurred. And that brings me to my observations. They're not trends. For the time being, they're simply informed speculation about how the nature of homegrown terrorism may be changing. The first is about the impact of the internet. A lot of the public discussion about homegrown radicalization has been around the idea of the lone wolf. We've heard about it today, we heard about it yesterday. The lone operator who apparently radicalizes on his own, buys into the ideology, goes out there and strikes. Now, there are a few genuine lone wolves out there. Roshanara Chowdhury in England and Major Hassan in the United States. But on the whole, the notion of the lone wolf is a lot fuzzier than it seems. The Boston bombers were described as lone wolves, but maybe they were not quite the same as Roshanara Chowdhury. The two guys in Woolwich weren't either. In both cases, in the case of the Boston bombers and the London attackers, they were not acting by definition as lone individuals. In both cases, they did have contacts with, they communicated with, and they were influenced by other extremists. They weren't signed-up members of Al-Qaeda, they didn't receive any orders or direction, but they clearly had connections to, and they'd socialized with other like-minded individuals. So are you a lone operator just because Al-Qaeda doesn't give you any order? Wasn't that what being leaderless was meant to be about? In my opinion, there is a potential trend, there is a development to be detected, but it's not the lone wolf. It's what's behind the lone wolf. It's what powers, what drives the emergence of those leaderless plots, and that's the increasing role of the internet, especially in people's radicalization. Not all of the people that have been described as lone wolves were actually on their own, as we saw. And among those who were on their own, not all of them felt lonely or socially isolated. But all of those so-called lone wolves were heavy users of online communication, and in all of these cases, it is processes that played out on the internet that were essential to understanding how they became radicalized, why they decided to act, and what they ended up doing. The lone wolf isn't the trend. If anything, it is the outcome of a trend. The real trend, the underlying trend, if there is one, is how the use of the internet has transformed and continues to transform homegrown processes of radicalization. It is the single most important qualitative difference to how people radicalized at the time of 9/11 12 years ago. We need to spend more time, more money, more brain cells trying to understand how exactly it works. My second observation is about the changing nature of the conflict. 9/11, Madrid, London, these were acts of strategic terrorism, cold, calculated attacks on innocent people, intended to change government policy, and it was governments that responded to these acts of terrorism. What we saw in Woolwich was different. The main response didn't come from government. Once the perpetrators had been arrested and charged, the immediate threat was over. The police didn't have to dismantle an organization because, from what we know, there wasn't much of an organization to begin with. The main response came in the form of a working-class, populist, nationalist street movement that calls itself the English Defence League. They are people who can mobilize hundreds, on a good day, thousands of people. Let's make no mistake. Just because they are the enemy of our enemy does not make them our friends. As you can see from these pictures here, they are thugs, they are bullies. Their ideology has produced Anders Breivik in Norway, and their fellow travelers have repeatedly attacked houses of worship. Just like Islamist extremists are hoping to bring out the worst in non-Muslim communities, the English Defence League is bringing out the worst in Muslim communities. They are not good news. They are producing a situation in which communities become polarized, in which different kinds of extremists feed off each other, egg each other on, and communities are at risk of falling apart. My point is, they are threatening to transform the conflict between terrorists and the government into a conflict between communities. We saw it this summer in Woolwich and the consequences of Woolwich. We saw it the previous year, 2012, in Germany, and we had similar provocations and riots in several other European countries prior to that. It's a dangerous development, and even if Europe does not descend into full-scale communal conflict, which I do not think it will, even if it doesn't, it means that countering terrorism alone is no longer enough, and that people who counter terrorism professionally have to become experts in community relations and community policing as much as they are experts in intelligence and counter-terrorism. Hence my headline, from counter-terrorism to quote-unquote community policing. My third and final observation is about foreign fighters. At the time of 9/11, the main fear in Europe and the United States was about outsiders, Arabs, Middle Easterners coming into Europe, the United States, Canada, to attack us at home. The threat, in other words, was outside in. Then, after Madrid, especially London 2005, the situation changed. The threat was no longer considered to be outside in, at least not mostly so. It was considered to be coming from the inside. Typically, second, third generation descendants of Muslim immigrants, European citizens, homegrown, attacking their own countries, that was the second phase. Now, for a couple of years maybe, I think we may have gone into a third phase. First, outside in, then inside. Now I'd argue the threat is going to be increasingly inside out. Jihadists from Europe going abroad. The reason is clear: the events of the Arab Spring, continuing turmoil in the Middle East, and especially the conflict in Syria. There have always been foreign fighters, people going to Pakistan, Somalia, Iraq, but the degree of mobilization that we've seen over the past couple of years is greater than anything that has happened before. A member of a Scandinavian intelligence service told me that the number of people going from his country to Syria over the past 2 years has been larger than the number of people going to any country, Iraq, Somalia, Pakistan, etc., taken together over the entire past decade. The numbers are stunning. They have been published by my own institute, by others. Aaron Zellen will talk about it, Thomas Heckhammer. If you are a jihadist in Europe, you're more likely right now thinking about traveling to Syria more than about attacking your own country. And I believe this will continue as long as the conflict in Syria continues. In the short term, this is actually making us safer. As long as Syria so completely absorbs the energies and attention of jihadists in Europe, there will be fewer truly dangerous plots in Europe and North America. But of course, we'd be foolish to feel secure. Syria is drawing in new people into the jihadist orbit, and not all of them will die a martyr's death in Syria. Some of them are certain to return. Indeed, we're seeing the first signs of Europeans in Syria becoming more institutionalized, for their networks to become firmer and more organized along national lines. You will hear a lot more about it in this conference from my colleagues. The bottom line is, my colleagues are right to study this, because foreign fighters, I believe, are the new homegrown terrorism. There's more of them now than there ever have been. They will keep us busy for years to come. So in summary then, it is foreign fighters, community conflict, and the internet. If I was a policymaker, if I was in counter-terrorism in Europe or North America, they are the issues that would keep me awake at night. They are the issues I'd be interested in, I'd be fired up about. And in fact, they are also top among the issues that I and my institute will study in the years to come. And if you want to follow us, here again, our Twitter handles and indeed our internet address. Thank you very much for your attention.